The church hid a secret chapter that contradicts all of Christianity. This was decided over 1700 years ago, and you were never told about it. Right now, as you listen to me, millions of people around the world are still living an edited version of the truth. A version that was carefully shaped by a group of powerful men who met in secret and decided which part of God you would know and which part you would bury forever. What you discover today can forever change the way you view God, faith, and everything you believed about Christianity, because there is a secret chapter hidden for centuries that completely contradicts everything you were taught. A chapter the church preferred to erase from history rather than allow it to reach your hands. Have you ever wondered why there are so many contradictions in the scriptures? Why do some of Jesus' teachings seem incomplete or cut short? Why do you feel something doesn't quite fit with official doctrine? It's no coincidence. It's the result of historical manipulation so profound that it changed the course of humanity. Imagine for a moment that everything you know about Jesus, about his deepest teachings, about the true message of love and spiritual freedom he came to bring to the world, had been filtered, edited, and modified by political and religious interests. Imagine that his words, entire gospels, divine revelations existed that were deliberately excluded from the Bible because they threatened the power of those who controlled the religious narrative. That's not imagination. That's exactly what happened. And today you're going to discover the truth they've kept hidden for 17 centuries. A truth so powerful, it changed the fate of millions of souls, including perhaps yours. This isn't just another video about religion. This is the moment when the curtain is drawn back, and you can see for the first time what really happened in the early centuries of Christianity, when a Roman emperor decided which version of God would survive and which would disappear. When a council of men arrogated to itself the divine right to determine what was sacred and what was heretical. But there's something even more disturbing. These hidden texts, these forbidden gospels, don't just still exist. They've been found, translated, studied. And what they reveal about the true teachings of Jesus is so revolutionary that it challenges every dogma, every ritual, every power structure the church built on their absence. Prepare for a journey that will shake the foundations of everything you thought you knew. Because by the time you finish watching this video, you'll never look at religion the same way again. The seed of true doubt, the doubt that liberates, not condemns, will have been planted in your heart. And with it the possibility of a direct connection with the divine that doesn't need intermediaries, temples, or human authorities to tell you how to love God. The truth about to be revealed isn't dangerous to your faith. It's dangerous to those who benefit from your spiritual ignorance. Have you also felt like something doesn't add up in what you've been taught? That strange feeling when you hear certain Bible passages and something inside you resists. As if your soul knows something important is missing. As if the pieces of the spiritual puzzle don't quite fit together. You are not alone. Thousands of people around the world are awakening like you. They are feeling that same restlessness, that same thirst for truth that goes beyond the prefabricated answers we were given as children. They are questioning not out of rebellion, but out of genuine love for divine truth. Maybe you grew up being told not to ask questions. That faith was believing without question, that doubting was sinful. But there's a world of difference between destructive doubt and a sincere search for truth. Jesus himself said, "Seek and you will find." He didn't say, "Blindly believe what others tell you to seek." Perhaps you once felt that your relationship with God could be more direct, more intimate, more authentic, that you didn't need so many intermediaries, so many rules, so many fears to connect with the sacred. That intuition you had wasn't mistaken. In fact, it was perfectly aligned with the original teachings that were hidden. There is something deeply healing in discovering that your most honest spiritual doubts don't distance you from God, but rather bring you closer to the truth He truly wanted to share with you. That your longing for a more authentic spirituality isn't a failing in your faith, but a calling from your soul toward full revelation. For years, many of us carried a spiritual guilt that wasn't ours. We were told we were unworthy sinners, that we needed external salvation, that we were small and insignificant before divine greatness. But what if all of this was part of a system of control? What if Jesus' original words spoke of your spiritual greatness, your direct connection to the divine, your innate capacity to experience the kingdom of heaven here and now. The texts you will learn today reveal a Jesus who did not come to create a religion, but to free humanity from all organized religion. A teacher who taught that the temple of God was within each human being, not in buildings constructed by human hands. A spiritual leader who spoke of divinity as a personal and non-transferable experience, not as a doctrine to be interpreted by others. This isn't an attack on your faith, it's an invitation to delve deeper into it in ways you may never have imagined possible. It's the discovery that your most genuine spiritual quest was completely justified, that there were concrete historical reasons why something didn't fit with what you were taught. I know this can be overwhelming. When we begin to question truths we've taken for granted for years, it's normal to feel a certain vertigo, but it's also liberating. Because on the other side of this process lies a more mature, more conscious, truer faith. A spirituality that doesn't need fear to sustain itself, but is fueled by unconditional love and authentic searching. Here in this space, we don't judge your process. It doesn't matter what religious tradition you come from, no matter what your current doubts are, no matter how lost or confused you feel on your spiritual path. What matters is that you have the courage to seek the truth for yourself. If you feel these revelations are touching something deep within you, subscribe. Here, each video is a new piece of this hidden truth. I won't promise you easy answers, because the truth is rarely easy. But I will accompany you on this journey of discovery with honesty, respect, and a deep love for authentic spiritual pursuits. Together, we will rebuild the bridge to a spirituality that doesn't ask you to abandon your intelligence, your intuition, or your heart. A spirituality that honors the magnificence of your soul and your innate ability to connect directly with the sacred. Why did a group of men decide who God was? This seemingly simple question takes us to the heart of one of the deepest and most disturbing mysteries in the history of Christianity. Because there was a specific moment in time when the divinity of Jesus was not an established fact, but a topic of fierce debate among early Christians. For the first 300 years after Jesus' death, dozens of different Christian communities existed, each with its own scriptures, its own interpretations of the Master's teachings, its own ways of understanding the divine nature. There was no single Bible. There was no single doctrine. There was no single official truth about who Jesus was or what he had come to teach. Who gave them the right to erase other gospels? This is the question that official history prefers not to answer. Because admitting that there was a conscious, deliberate, and politically motivated selection of which texts would survive and which would disappear means acknowledging that the Bible we know today is not the complete Word of God, but rather an edited version for human convenience. Imagine if there were a gospel in which Jesus spoke explicitly about reincarnation, where he explained that each soul has multiple opportunities for spiritual growth through different lifetimes, where he taught that karma, the law of spiritual cause and effect, was fundamental to understanding divine justice. Do you think that gospel would have been included in a religion that profited financially from the fear of eternal hell? Imagine if there were texts where Jesus revealed that every human being has direct access to divinity, without the need for priests, rituals, or religious institutions as intermediaries. Where he explained specific techniques of meditation and mystical connection that anyone could practice in the privacy of their own home. Do you think those texts would have been preserved by a church that built its power on the premise that it was the only path to salvation? There were Gospels in which Mary Magdalene appeared not as a repentant prostitute, but as Jesus' most advanced disciple, the one who best understood his esoteric teachings, the one chosen by him to continue transmitting the deepest mysteries of the tradition. Do you think these texts would have survived in a culture that required women to be subservient to male authority? There were scriptures that spoke of Christian Gnosticism, where direct knowledge of God was more important than blind faith, where it was taught that every person could experience personal divine revelations without the need for external validation, where spiritual enlightenment was presented as the natural goal of every human being, not a privilege reserved for a few exceptional saints. Today, we're going to talk about the chapter the Church preferred to bury in time, but which archaeology and historical discoveries have managed to rescue from oblivion. We're going to delve into the apocryphal Gospels, the secret councils, and the political decisions that shaped official Christian doctrine during the 4th century. This isn't a fantastic conspiracy story. It's documented history, with dates, names, places, and consequences that can be verified by anyone willing to investigate. It's the story of how early Christianity, diverse and mystical, was transformed into an institutional, uniform religion, controlled by the political power of the Roman Empire. But it is also the story of how these forbidden texts survived hidden in caves, in secret libraries, in manuscripts clandestinely copied by rebellious monks who refused to accept the censorship of the complete truth. It is the story of how, in the 21st century, we have access to Jesus' teachings that were deliberately hidden for 17 centuries. When you begin to read these texts, when you hear these words that were considered too dangerous for official doctrine, it will become clear why they were censored. Not because they were false, but because they were too true, too liberating, too empowering for people who needed to maintain control over the masses through fear and spiritual dependence. The question you should be asking yourself isn't whether these texts are authentic. The question is why someone went to so much trouble to ensure they never reached you. The year was 325 AD. The place was the city of Nicaea in what is now Turkey. The Roman Emperor Constantine, who just a few years earlier had legalized Christianity throughout the empire, summoned 300 bishops from different regions to resolve once and for all the doctrinal disputes that were dividing the early church. But here's the detail that changed history forever. Constantine wasn't a Christian when he called this council. He would officially convert to Christianity only on his deathbed, 12 years later. He was a pragmatic politician who saw religious unification as a perfect tool to consolidate his imperial power. His interest wasn't theological, it was strategic. For 3 centuries, Christians had lived with a diversity of beliefs that would seem unthinkable to us today. Some groups believed Jesus was fully divine, others that he was fully human, and others that he was a combination of both. Some followed the Gospels we know today, others relied on completely different texts. Some practiced elaborate rituals, others preferred silent meditation and direct connection with the divine. Arianism, led by a priest named Arius, held that Jesus was subordinate to the Father, that he had been created by God, but was not equal with God. This movement had millions of followers throughout the empire and represented a direct threat to the idea of the Trinity that would eventually become official doctrine. Christian Gnostics, heirs to a very ancient mystical tradition, believed that salvation came through direct knowledge of the divine, not through faith in established doctrines. They had their own gospels, their own spiritual practices, and their own interpretations of Jesus' teachings that emphasized personal experience over institutional authority. The Marcionites followed the teachings of Marcion, who proposed a biblical canon completely different from the one we know today. He rejected the Old Testament entirely and had a version of the New Testament that included texts later declared heretical. Constantine needed order. He needed a single official version of Christianity that could serve as the social cement of his empire. He could not allow theological disputes that divided his subjects and weakened his political authority to continue. So he did something unprecedented in religious history. He turned faith into a matter of democratic voting. The bishops gathered at Nicaea weren't there to discover divine truth through prayer or revelation. They were there to vote on which version of the truth would become imperial law. The result was the Nicene Creed, which officially established that Jesus was true God and true man, co-eternal with the Father, of the same divine substance. The Arians were declared heretics. Their books were burned, their leaders were exiled, their followers were persecuted. But the Council of Nicaea was only the beginning. In the following centuries, other councils continued to refine the official doctrine, always under the supervision of the imperial power. At the Council of Constantinople in 381, the doctrine of the Trinity was finalized. At the Council of Ephesus in 431, Mary was officially established as the Mother of God. At the Council of Chalcedon in 451, the dual nature of Christ was defined with mathematical precision. Each of these councils meant the elimination of more texts, more traditions, more ways of understanding Christianity that didn't fit the official narrative. Gnostic gospels were banned. Texts that spoke of reincarnation were destroyed. Teachings that empowered women were censored. Mystical practices that didn't require clerical mediation were declared dangerous. The most disturbing aspect of this entire process is that the criteria for determining what was authentic and what was heretical were not spiritual, but political. The texts that supported the power structure the institutional church sought to establish were preserved. Those that questioned it were eliminated. When you study the historical documents of these councils, it becomes clear that decisions about the nature of God were made by men who were more concerned with maintaining imperial unity than with preserving the integrity of Jesus' original teachings. Emperor Theodosius, Constantine's successor, was even more radical. In 380, he declared Nicene Christianity the sole official religion of the empire and banned all other forms of Christianity under penalty of death. It wasn't enough for one official version to exist. All other versions had to disappear completely. I want to know your opinion. Do you think it was fair for a group of men to define what is and isn't the Word of God? Do you think a non-Christian Roman emperor had the spiritual authority to determine the nature of divinity? Do you think decisions made for political reasons can be considered divinely inspired? Leave it in the comments. I want to know how you feel about this in your heart, not just in your mind. They decided for you, for me, and for millions who deserve to be worshipped and who should be forgotten. This phrase encapsulates the most disturbing reality of the early Christian councils, that Jesus' divinity was not a revelation from heaven, but a decision made in political salons by men with very specific interests in the outcome. Before the Council of Nicaea, the question of Jesus' exact nature was a matter of open debate among Christians. Some viewed him as a great spiritual master, an enlightened prophet who had achieved complete union with God. Others believed he was an angelic being who had temporarily taken human form. Still others held that he was a human who had been adopted by God because of his spiritual perfection. But Constantine couldn't build a unified empire on the basis of open theological debates. He needed clear dogmas, unquestionable authorities, truths that didn't admit of personal interpretation, so he transformed what had been a collective spiritual quest into a series of imperial decrees that had the force of law. The process was so manipulated that it's chilling when you study it in detail. Constantine not only summoned the bishops, he also paid their travel expenses, hosted them in his palaces, offered them sumptuous banquets, and made it clear to them what he expected from the council. It wasn't exactly an environment conducive to independent divine inspiration. Many of the bishops who voted for Jesus' absolute divinity did so not out of theological conviction, but out of political expediency. They knew that opposing the emperor's wishes meant exile, the loss of their positions of power, and persecution from their communities. The inspiration of the Holy Spirit that supposedly guided these decisions was heavily influenced by very earthly considerations. Arius, the leader of the movement that questioned the absolute divinity of Jesus, was exiled immediately after the council. His books were publicly burned. His followers were persecuted with the same ferocity that Christians had been persecuted by pagan emperors. The difference was that now the persecution was carried out in the name of correct Christianity against heretical Christianity. But there is something even more disturbing about this whole process. The criteria used to determine which texts were inspired by God and which were the work of the devil had nothing to do with their antiquity, their proximity to the original events, or their consistency with the known teachings of Jesus. The fundamental criterion was whether they supported or challenged the power structure that the institutional church wanted to establish. Gospels that presented Jesus as a teacher who taught spiritual self-realization were rejected because they threatened the need for religious intermediaries. Texts that spoke of spiritual equality between men and women were censored because they contradicted the patriarchal structures the church sought to preserve. Teachings about the direct experience of the divine were prohibited because they made clerical authority unnecessary. Constantine didn't stop at doctrinal definition. He also established the hierarchical structure that would turn Christianity into a religion of control rather than a religion of liberation. He created the office of Pope as supreme authority, established the system of territorial bishoprics, instituted clerical celibacy, and transformed what had been an egalitarian community of spiritual seekers into a pyramid of power, with himself at the top. The result was that for the first time in history, a religion was consciously designed as a tool of social control. Roman emperors had tried for centuries to create a unifying religion for their empire, but had failed because they had tried to impose foreign gods on populations that had their own traditions. Constantine had the brilliant idea of taking a religion that already had millions of followers and modifying it to serve his imperial purposes. The transformation was so complete that post-Nicene Christianity would have been unrecognizable to Jesus' early disciples. Where they had seen a teacher who taught a direct connection to God, there was now a system that required clerical mediation. Where they had experienced an egalitarian spirituality, there were now rigid hierarchies. Where they had found liberation from religious fear, there were now doctrines of eternal hell and damnation. The bishops who participated in these councils were not evil. Many of them sincerely believed they were serving God, but they were serving God within a political system that had predetermined what the acceptable answers to fundamental theological questions would be. Their divine inspiration operated within very specific limits set by imperial power. When you read the historical records of how these decisions were made, when you study the political pressures that influenced each vote, when you analyze the practical consequences of each doctrinal definition, it becomes clear that what was presented as divine revelation was, in reality, social engineering applied to religion. The question this leaves us with is devastating. If the nature of God was decided by a vote in a political council, how much of what we consider religious truth is based on authentic revelation, and how much is the product of human manipulation? What did they fear so much that they had to keep silent for centuries? This question takes us directly to the heart of the apocryphal Gospels, those texts that were deliberately excluded from the biblical canon not because they were false, but because they were too true for the interests of those who built institutional religious power. The Gospel of Thomas, discovered in 1945 in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, contains 114 sayings attributed directly to Jesus. Many of these sayings do not appear in any of the canonical Gospels, and their content is revolutionary. There Jesus speaks of the divinity inherent in every human being. "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me, and I will become like them, and hidden things will be revealed to them." Can you imagine how the history of Christianity would have changed if this message had been part of official doctrine? Instead of teaching that human beings are unworthy sinners in need of external salvation, it would have taught that every person has direct access to the same divine consciousness that Jesus manifested. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene presents a completely different perspective on the role of women in the original teachings. There, Mary is not a repentant sinner, but the most advanced disciple, the one to whom Jesus entrusted the deepest mysteries of the spiritual tradition. Peter, jealous of the special relationship between Jesus and Mary, questions, "Did he speak in secret to a woman before us?" And Mary responds by explaining visions and teachings that the male disciples had not received. This gospel was censored because it directly threatened the patriarchal structure that the institutional church needed to maintain control. A religion where women had spiritual authority equal to or greater than men was incompatible with the social structures of the Roman Empire. The Gospel of Philip contains teachings on the nature of the sacrament of marriage that would have revolutionized Christian understanding of sexuality and mystical union. It describes the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene as a model of the sacred union between the masculine and feminine principles of divinity. But perhaps the most disturbing of all is the Gospel of Judas, which presents the betrayal not as an act of evil, but as a conscious sacrifice that Judas made at Jesus' own request. "You will surpass them all," Jesus tells Judas, "for you will sacrifice the man who clothes me." This perspective would have completely changed the victim-victimizer narrative that became central to official doctrine. The Gnostic texts go even further. In the Gospel of Truth, it is taught that humanity's fundamental error is ignorance of its own divine nature. It speaks of truth to those who seek it and of knowledge to those who have sinned in their error. Salvation does not come from faith in external doctrines, but from direct knowledge of spiritual reality. These texts also contained explicit teachings on reincarnation and spiritual evolution through multiple lives. In the Pistis Sophia, a lengthy Gnostic text, Jesus explains in detail how souls pass through different incarnations until they reach complete purification. Until they have passed through all the trials, he teaches, they cannot inherit the light. Do you realize why these texts were considered so dangerous? A religion that taught reincarnation could not use the fear of eternal hell as a tool of control. A religion that taught the inherent divinity of every human being could not justify rigid hierarchical structures. A religion that gave equal spiritual authority to women could not sustain institutional patriarchy. The methods used to eliminate these texts were systematic and brutal. Not only was their circulation prohibited, they were ordered to be publicly burned. Monks who refused to hand over the copies they had in their libraries were excommunicated. Communities that continued to use these texts in their rituals were declared heretical and persecuted. But some texts survived. Rebel monks hid them in ceramic jars and buried them in the desert. Secret copyists reproduced them in codices, which they kept in clandestine libraries. Entire communities took refuge in remote regions where they could continue practicing original Christianity without interference from the imperial authorities. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi library in the 20th century was like finding a time capsule containing the Christianity that might have been. 52 complete texts that had been lost for 1,600 years, preserved by the sand of the Egyptian desert. When archaeologists translated these texts, they found a Christianity completely different from the one we know, a Christianity where personal mystical experience was more important than institutional doctrine, where spiritual equality among all human beings was fundamental, where direct knowledge of God was not only possible, but the central goal of religious practice. The question that inevitably arises is, how many other texts were destroyed forever? How many of Jesus' teachings were lost because they threatened the interests of those who needed to control the religious narrative? What would have become of Christianity and of the world if these texts had been preserved as part of the official tradition? You don't need a temple because you are the temple. This phrase, found in the Gospel of Thomas, perfectly sums up the essence of the teachings that were censored. The Jesus of the apocryphal texts did not come to establish an institutional religion, but to free humanity from all external spiritual dependence. The kingdom of heaven is within you and without you, he teaches in these forbidden texts. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will know that you are children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty. Do you realize the radical difference between this teaching and what we've been told for centuries? Instead of teaching us that we are unworthy sinners, in need of external salvation, Jesus was teaching that we are direct expressions of divinity, capable of experiencing the kingdom of heaven here and now, in this life through profound self-knowledge. In the Gospel of Philip, Jesus explains, "Those who say they will first die and then be resurrected are mistaken. If they do not first receive the resurrection while alive, when they die, they will receive nothing." The resurrection was not a future event dependent on faith in specific doctrines, but a transformation of consciousness available to anyone willing to awaken spiritually. The specific techniques Jesus taught to achieve this transformation were also censored. In Gnostic texts, we find detailed references to meditation practices, conscious breathing techniques, and methods for accessing altered states of consciousness that allowed for the direct experience of the divine. When you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside and the outside like the inside and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one, then you will enter the kingdom, teaches the Gospel of Thomas. This is an accurate description of what mystical traditions call the union of opposites, the state of non-dual consciousness, where all conceptual separations are transcended. These teachings also included a completely different understanding of the nature of good and evil. Nothing outside a person can defile them by entering them, Jesus says in these texts. Evil was not an external force attacking human beings, but simply ignorance of one's own divine nature. In the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Jesus explains that the nature of matter will dissolve into its very root. teaching that the physical world is a temporary projection of consciousness, not a reality separate from the spiritual. This understanding would have revolutionized Christianity's relationship with the body, sexuality, and the material world in general. But perhaps the most revolutionary teachings concerned spiritual authority. Do not set a guide over you, Jesus warns in these texts, for where there is a guide, there is also confusion. Reliance on external religious authorities was seen as an obstacle to authentic spiritual development, not as a help. He who seeks will find, and he who finds will be troubled, and he who is troubled will be amazed, and he will reign over all, teaches the Gospel of Thomas. Authentic spiritual searching inevitably challenges established beliefs, generates turmoil in the conditioned mind, but ultimately leads to the wonder of the direct discovery of truth. These forgotten words of Jesus painted a radically different spiritual path from the one that became official doctrine. Instead of blind obedience to external authorities, he taught the development of inner discernment. Instead of faith in incomprehensible dogmas, he promoted the direct experience of the sacred. Instead of dependence on rituals and sacraments administered by others, he offered techniques that anyone could practice in the privacy of their own heart. The Jesus of these forbidden texts was more similar to the great mystical masters of all traditions than to the founder of an institutional religion. His teachings resonated with the wisdom of the Buddha, Lao Tzu, the great Sufi saints, and the Vedantic sages. It was a universal spirituality that transcended specific cultural and religious limitations. When you know what is before you, then what is hidden will be revealed to you, he promised, for nothing is hidden that will not be revealed. Spiritual truth was not a secret guarded by religious elites, but a reality open to anyone sincere in its search. Imagine what the world would have been like if these teachings had been preserved as the heart of Christianity. Instead of religious wars, we would have had contemplative traditions. Instead of inquisitions, we would have had schools of wisdom. Instead of fear of divine judgment, we would have had a celebration of the divinity inherent in every human being. Perhaps everything you've experienced up until now was based on decisions that were never yours to make. This realization can be overwhelming, but also profoundly liberating. Because when you understand that much of what you considered absolute spiritual truth was actually the result of political decisions made 17 centuries ago, a whole new space opens up for your authentic search for the sacred. Perhaps you grew up feeling that there was something in official doctrine that didn't fully resonate with your heart. Perhaps you experienced moments of direct connection with the divine that didn't fit with what you'd been taught about how spirituality should work. Perhaps you sensed that your relationship with God could be more intimate, more personal, more free than traditional religious structures allowed. Those intuitions weren't mistaken. They were echoes of the original teachings that had been censored, resonances of a more authentic spirituality that your soul instinctively recognized. Your spiritual restlessness wasn't a failure of your faith. It was a call to a deeper truth that had been deliberately hidden. You may now feel confused, perhaps even betrayed by institutions you trusted for years. It's natural to feel a certain disorientation when you discover that truths you took for granted were built on controversial human decisions. But this process of questioning is not destructive. It is the beginning of a more mature and conscious spiritual quest. The question isn't whether you should abandon your faith, but whether you're willing to delve deeper into it in a way that transcends the limitations others placed on your spiritual quest. The question isn't whether Jesus was who you believed he was, but whether you're ready to learn about aspects of his teachings that were considered too revolutionary for mainstream doctrine. Many people who go through this process of spiritual awakening initially feel like they are losing their faith. But what's really happening is that they are losing the limitations they placed on their faith. They are freeing themselves from a second-hand spirituality and discovering a direct and personal connection with the sacred. It's no coincidence that you feel drawn to these revelations at this specific moment in your life. The search for authentic spiritual truth arises when the soul is ready to transcend prefabricated answers and embark on the adventure of personal discovery. It is a sign of spiritual maturity, not of weakness in faith. The texts we have explored today are not anti-Christian. They are profound Christianity, They do not contradict the essential teachings of Jesus. They reveal dimensions of those teachings that were deliberately hidden. They do not destroy the possibility of an authentic relationship with the divine. They free it from the restrictions others have placed on it. The truth is that you have always had direct access to the sacred. You have always been able to experience the divine presence without intermediaries. You have always been worthy of God's unconditional love without needing to earn that dignity through specific rituals, doctrines, or institutions. These abilities were not granted by any religion. They are inherent to your spiritual nature. What changed today wasn't your ability to connect with the divine, but your understanding that that ability was never truly taken away from you. It was simply obscured by centuries of religious conditioning that taught you to look outside for what was always within. The path forward doesn't require you to reject everything you've learned about spirituality. It requires you to develop discernment to distinguish between teachings that liberate your spirit and those that limit it, between practices that bring you closer to the direct experience of the sacred and those that keep you dependent on external authorities. This process of discernment isn't something you can do all at once. It's a lifelong, ongoing refinement of your spiritual understanding. Every experience, every text you read, every moment of meditation or prayer, every encounter with other sincere seekers will be an opportunity to deepen your authentic relationship with the divine. The community of people undergoing this spiritual awakening is much larger than you might imagine. Around the world, millions of souls are questioning the limitations they placed on their spiritual quest. They are rediscovering the possibility of a faith that doesn't require abandoning intelligence, intuition, or personal experience. Where in the world are you watching this video from? Write it down below. I want to feel how far this truth is reaching. I want to know that you are not alone in this quest. That we are a global community of seekers, simultaneously freeing ourselves from the limitations others have placed on our relationship with the sacred. You can't go back. The truth has touched your soul. Once you understand that much of what you considered immutable spiritual truth was the result of controversial political decisions, you can't return to comfortable ignorance. Once you experience even a glimpse of your innate ability to connect directly with the divine, you can't pretend you need intermediaries to access the sacred. This awakening is not a loss. It's an immense gain. You have not lost your faith. You have lost the limitations others placed on it. You have not lost your connection with Jesus. You have discovered dimensions of his teachings that were deliberately hidden. You have not lost your spirituality. You have freed it from artificial restrictions that were never meant to exist. But with this liberation also comes a responsibility. You can no longer blame others for your spiritual growth. You can no longer expect external authorities to tell you what to think, what to feel, or how to relate to the divine. Authentic spiritual awakening requires you to take full responsibility for your search for truth. This can be intimidating at first. For centuries, we were taught that spiritual dependence was a virtue, that questioning religious authorities was dangerous, that relying on our direct experience of the sacred was arrogant. But these teachings were designed to keep us small, docile, and easily controlled. The truth is exactly the opposite. Jesus came to teach that every human being has direct access to the same divine consciousness he manifested. He did not come to create a religion of dependent followers, but rather a humanity of enlightened beings capable of experiencing for themselves the reality of the sacred. Greater works than these you will do, he promised. He wasn't talking about exceptional physical miracles reserved for a few special saints. He was speaking of the spiritual potential inherent in every human soul to transcend the limitations of the ego and experience reality from the perspective of divine consciousness. Together we are rebuilding the faith that was taken from us. We are not inventing a new religion. We are rediscovering the original spirituality that was censored. We are not rebelling against God. We are freeing ourselves from the human distortions that obscured divine truth. This reconstruction is not an intellectual project. It is not simply a matter of studying ancient texts or analyzing historical decisions. It is a process of personal transformation that requires courage, honesty, and a commitment to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Every time you choose direct experience over second-hand doctrine, you contribute to this reconstruction. Every time you trust your spiritual intuition more than external authorities, you add a stone to the inner temple we are collectively building. Every time you practice a spirituality that liberates rather than controls, you become part of this silent revolution of consciousness. You don't need to announce this awakening to everyone. You don't need to convince others or engage in exhausting theological debates. Authentic transformation naturally radiates from inner peace to the outer world. When you live from a genuine connection to the sacred, others sense that authenticity without needing explanation. The path forward requires patience with yourself. You will have moments of doubt, periods where you miss the simple certainty of unquestioned beliefs. You will face resistance from people who feel threatened by your spiritual growth. You will discover that some relationships cannot withstand your newfound authenticity. All of this is a normal part of the awakening process. Don't take it as a sign that you're on the wrong path. Take it as confirmation that you're truly growing. Butterflies can't return to being caterpillars, no matter how safe it would have been to remain in the cocoon. Your spiritual quest now becomes an adventure of ongoing discovery. Each day can bring new understandings, new experiences of the sacred, and new dimensions of truth that were previously hidden. There are no artificial limits to how deep you can go or how authentic your connection with the divine can become. The apocryphal texts you learned about today are just the beginning. There are mystical traditions in every culture that preserve aspects of original spiritual wisdom. There are contemplative practices that can lead you to direct experiences of what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven. There are communities of sincere seekers who can accompany you on this journey without judging your progress. But most importantly, you have within you everything you need for this quest. The same divine consciousness that manifested itself through Jesus is available to you here and now, not as a future promise conditioned on your good behavior, but as a present reality that you can experience to the extent that you are willing to awaken to it. The world needs people who live from this spiritual authenticity. It needs human beings who don't depend on external authorities for their connection with the sacred. It needs individuals who can radiate peace, love, and wisdom, not because they followed religious rules, but because they discovered the divinity inherent in their own nature. You are part of this new generation of spiritual seekers who are freeing humanity from centuries of religious manipulation. Subscribe, because in the next video, I'm going to reveal what happened to the Gospels that spoke of reincarnation, texts that the Church completely erased. Look, it's already appearing on your screen. But before you go, I need you to understand something fundamental about what we've just discovered together. What we share today isn't information you can find anywhere. It's not conspiracy theories without historical foundation. It's real documents, verifiable decisions, authentic texts that have been studied by the world's top scholars for decades. The difference is that this information is generally kept locked away in academic circles, far from the reach of ordinary people who have a right to know the truth about their own spiritual heritage. Every video I upload to this channel is the result of months of in-depth research. I read documents in ancient languages, consult primary sources, and verify each historical claim with multiple scholarly references. This isn't content that can be created quickly or superficially. It's a labor of love toward the truth that requires total dedication. That's why your subscription isn't just a click of a button. It's your vote of confidence in a project committed to revealing the full story of your spiritual tradition without censorship, manipulation, or political or religious agenda. It's your way of ensuring that these revelations continue to reach more people who, like you, feel they deserve to know the full truth. But there's something even more urgent. The forces that kept this information hidden for 17 centuries haven't disappeared. There's constant pressure to censor, discredit, or simply ignore content like this by platform algorithms. Your subscription and engagement are the only real protection we have against these attempts to silence us. When you subscribe, when you comment, when you share these videos, you are actively participating in preserving information that others prefer to remain hidden. You are helping to create a global community of truth seekers that cannot be easily silenced. The next video will go even deeper into revelations that will challenge everything you thought you knew about life after death. We'll explore specific texts where Jesus speaks explicitly about past lives, about the soul's journey through multiple incarnations, and about the true nature of spiritual karma. Did you know that in the early centuries of Christianity, reincarnation was widely accepted as a doctrine? Did you know that there were specific councils dedicated to eliminating this teaching because it threatened the economic control the church exercised through fear of eternal hell? Did you know that there are entire gospels detailing conversations where Jesus explains the process of soul evolution through multiple lives? These texts were considered so dangerous that they were not only banned, they were actively persecuted and destroyed with a ferocity that surpassed even the persecution of early Christians by the Roman Empire, because a religion that taught reincarnation could not keep people in constant fear of final judgment. A doctrine that explained divine justice through multiple opportunities for growth could not justify the sale of indulgences or spiritual extortion. But some of these texts survived, and what they reveal about Jesus' original teachings will forever change your understanding of the purpose of human existence, the nature of divine justice, and the true reasons why we experience suffering and joy in this life. I can't give you all the details here, because it would be impossible to do justice to the depth of this revelation in just a few minutes. We need a full video to explore the implications of what it means for Jesus to explicitly teach about past and future lives. We need time to analyze why this teaching was considered so threatening that it had to be completely removed from official Christianity. Your subscription ensures that you receive this information as soon as it's ready. But more importantly, it ensures that you're part of a community that is actively rebuilding the authentic spiritual understanding that was stolen from humanity centuries ago. Please turn on notifications, because these videos sometimes face algorithmic restrictions precisely because of the truths they reveal. I don't want you to miss any of these revelations due to technical issues beyond my control. In the comments, tell me what impacted you most about what we discovered today. Was it learning that Jesus' divinity was decided by political vote? Was it discovering that entire gospels existed that were deliberately censored? Was it realizing that your spiritual intuition was correct when you felt something didn't fit with official doctrine? Your comment isn't just feedback for me, it's testimony for others going through the same awakening process. When you share your experience, you help others feel less alone in this search for authentic spiritual truth. This is more than a YouTube channel. It's a global movement of consciences freeing themselves from centuries of religious manipulation. It's a community of souls who have decided they deserve to know the full truth about their spiritual heritage. It's a silent revolution that is changing the way humanity relates to the sacred. The video about the Gospels of Reincarnation is appearing on your screen now. Click on it and prepare for the next level of revelations that will complete the picture of what Jesus really taught about eternal life. Thank you for watching this video until the end. We will see you in the next video.